It was a chilly morning in the heart of the city. The streets were still waking up, and the faint smell of roasted coffee beans floated in the air from the many cafes lining the sidewalks. Among them, a small Starbucks branch was starting to buzz with the usual morning crowd. People hurried in, eager to get their first coffee, checking their watches and phones as they moved along. Inside, a young barista was finishing up the early morning rush. She had been working there for a few years, and she knew most of the regulars by name. Despite the repetitive nature of her work, she always tried to greet each customer with a smile, hoping that small gesture might make their day a little lighter. Today, though, something unusual caught her attention before the first wave of the morning crowd fully arrived. Through the large glass windows, she noticed an elderly woman sitting on the cold pavement outside, bundled in layers of worn-out clothing. Her hands were tucked tightly into her sleeves, and her face was partially hidden beneath a thin scarf. She had a small tattered bag beside her, and it was clear she had been sitting there for a while. The barista's heart immediately went out to her. She knew the streets could be cruel, especially in the winter mornings when temperatures dipped low. The barista glanced around to see if anyone else had noticed the woman. Most people were walking by, headphones on, eyes glued to their phones, barely registering her presence. A few glanced briefly and continued on their way without a second thought. It made the barista feel a pang of sadness. She had passed by people like this countless times before, and she knew how easy it was for society to ignore those in need. But today she felt she had to do something. She looked around the cafe, noting a small tray of leftover pastries that hadn't been sold in the morning rush. Normally these would be thrown out or set aside, but she saw an opportunity. She didn't plan to make a scene or draw attention to herself. She just wanted to help. She quietly picked up a croissant and a muffin, placing them carefully in a paper bag along with a small cup of coffee she had prepared. Her hands trembled slightly, partly from the cold and partly from the nervous excitement of doing something she wasn't supposed to do. The barista took a deep breath, grabbed the bag, and stepped outside. The air hit her face sharply, colder than she expected. The city noise seemed to fade for a moment as she approached the elderly woman. She knelt down slightly, making herself smaller, trying not to startle her. "I thought you might like this," she said softly, holding out the bag. The woman looked up slowly, her eyes wide and uncertain at first. There was a long pause before recognition and gratitude softened her features. Her hands shook as she reached out to accept the food, and she murmured a quiet, heartfelt thank you. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the barista's chest tighten with warmth. She realized that small acts could have a bigger impact than she had imagined. For a few minutes they sat on the edge of the cafe's entrance, talking quietly. The elderly woman spoke little, just enough to let the barista know her name and that she had been on the streets for many years. She shared tiny fragments of her story, how she used to live nearby, how circumstances had forced her onto the streets, and how lonely it could feel. The barista listened intently, feeling a mix of sorrow and admiration for this woman's resilience. She realized that kindness wasn't just about feeding someone. It was also about seeing them, acknowledging their existence, and treating them with dignity. Meanwhile, passers-by occasionally glanced over, some with curiosity, others with barely disguised judgment. The barista tried not to let it affect her, focusing instead on the small conversation happening right in front of her. She didn't want to be remembered for breaking any rules or bending policies. She just wanted to offer a moment of comfort to someone who clearly needed it. As she handed the last bite of pastry to the woman, a faint smile crossed the elderly woman's face. It was brief but genuine, and it left a lasting impression on the barista. She realized that she had made a real connection, however fleeting, and that feeling was priceless. The woman's gratitude wasn't about the food alone. It was about being seen and cared for in a world that often turned its back. After a few more moments, the barista knew she had to return inside. She quietly waved goodbye, telling the woman to stay warm. The elderly woman clutched the bag to her chest, nodding solemnly, and watched as the young barista walked back into the cafe. Once inside, she tried to blend back into her routine, but her mind kept drifting to the woman outside. She wondered where she would go next, if anyone else would offer her a helping hand, and if the simple act of sharing food could inspire others to act with compassion. It was a small, ordinary morning in the life of a city cafe, but for the barista, it became extraordinary. She felt a mixture of fulfillment and anxiety. knowing that what she had done could have consequences. Yet in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the brief human connection, the acknowledgement of someone who was too often invisible, and the reminder that kindness could take root in the most unexpected places. The barista returned to her duties, smiling faintly at customers as they came in, her heart still warmed by the encounter outside. She hoped that even a small gesture like hers could ripple outward, creating a chain of goodwill. Though the city continued its rush around her, she carried a quiet sense of purpose, a reminder that every act of empathy, no matter how small, mattered in the larger tapestry of human life. As the morning progressed, the story of the small act of kindness began to take on a life of its own. Though the barista had no way of knowing it yet, she simply went about her work, washing cups, steaming milk, and serving drinks, all the while carrying the memory of a quiet connection made on a cold city morning, a memory that would soon take an unexpected turn. The morning air was still crisp. When the barista returned to her work inside the cafe, steam rose from the milk frother, mingling with the rich aroma of coffee, but her mind lingered on the woman outside. She couldn't shake the image of her shivering hands and cautious eyes, the fragile hope that had shown in her expression when offered a warm drink and leftover pastries. It was one of those moments that seemed to freeze time, small yet profound, reminding her that even in a city of strangers, human connection was still possible. What she didn't know was that her quiet act had not gone unnoticed. Just a few steps away, leaning casually against a parked car, a tall man watched the scene unfold. He was not someone easily recognized by the crowds, though anyone familiar with Hollywood faces might have noticed him before. He had stepped away from the commotion of the city to grab a coffee without drawing attention, wanting nothing more than a brief moment of normalcy in the morning bustle. As he observed, his gaze lingered on the interaction between the barista and the elderly woman. He noticed the gentle way she spoke, the careful handling of the food, the quiet empathy that radiated from her. He didn't move closer, fearing that interference might break the delicate moment, but he allowed himself to watch from a distance. There was something so genuine, so human, about the simple act that he felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. The elderly woman looked up at the barista, her eyes reflecting a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that could not be easily named. She had grown used to being ignored, to the invisible walls built between her and the rest of the world. But here was someone who saw her, not as a problem, not as a nuisance, but as a person deserving of kindness. It was a rare feeling, and it struck her like a gentle breeze in the middle of a long, cold winter. The barista knelt beside her for a moment longer, talking softly, not prying but listening. She asked the woman if she was warm enough, if she had somewhere safe to go later in the day, if there was anything else she might need. The woman replied with faint, hesitant words, her voice a mix of gratitude and caution. It was clear she had been let down before, and trust was not freely given. The barista, sensing this, remained patient, letting her guide the pace of their brief conversation. Around them, the city continued in its usual rhythm. Cars honked as they crawled through traffic, cyclists weaved past pedestrians, and shopkeepers greeted the first customers of the day. Most people were unaware of the small, meaningful exchange happening outside the cafe. For them, the streets were just another part of their routine, a backdrop to their morning commute. Yet for the barista and the elderly woman, it was a pause from the ordinary, a moment that felt separate from the rush and noise, filled instead with shared humanity. The man watching from across the street remained still, careful not to draw attention. He recognized a certain courage in the barista's actions, an everyday heroism that often went unacknowledged. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was powerful in its simplicity. He felt compelled to remember this, not for recognition, not for praise, but because witnessing genuine kindness reminded him of something he rarely saw in the hustle of daily life: unselfish, human empathy. After a few minutes, the barista handed over the final pastry, ensuring the woman had enough to eat. She encouraged her to stay warm, and offered a comforting smile before stepping back toward the cafe entrance. The elderly woman clutched the small bag of food to her chest, her eyes reflecting a mix of relief and surprise. For a fleeting moment, the cold streets seemed less harsh, the world less indifferent. The kindness shown to her, simple as it was, created a ripple of hope that she would carry with her through the day. Inside the cafe, the barista tried to focus on her work, taking orders and preparing drinks with practiced hands. She kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see the woman gone, swallowed again by the city's indifference. But she remained seated just outside, savoring the food and drink, quietly absorbing the small comfort that had been offered. The barista couldn't know that someone had observed everything, that her quiet courage was being witnessed by a stranger who carried influence but sought no personal gain. The tall man leaned slightly forward, intrigued by the authenticity of the scene. He remembered times when he had been approached by strangers in need and had hesitated, unsure how to act or whether his gesture would make any difference. Watching the barista, he realized that it wasn't about grand gestures or public recognition. It was about presence, attention, and the willingness to care without expecting anything in return. That realization settled in him quietly, a small but significant reminder of the impact that one person could have on another. For the elderly woman, the barista's act was more than a meal. It was a validation of her existence, a rare acknowledgement in a world that often overlooked her struggles. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease, if only slightly, and a sense of dignity returned that had been eroded by years of neglect and isolation. In her own way, she wanted to convey her gratitude, but words alone felt inadequate. Instead, she offered a soft smile, a gesture of trust and recognition that spoke louder than any sentence could. Time seemed to stretch, though the morning continued to advance. The cafe filled with more customers, conversations blending into a low hum, the aroma of coffee and pastries mingling with the winter air. Yet outside, a small bubble of connection remained, unshaken by the passing crowd. The barista's heart carried a quiet satisfaction, the type that comes not from applause or reward, but from knowing that a simple, selfless action had made a difference, however small. The man continued to observe, resisting the temptation to approach. He was a stranger, an outsider to the moment, and he didn't want to interrupt the delicate balance of interaction. He had learned that some acts of kindness are purest when unobserved, yet he felt compelled to remember it, to carry the memory with him. There was a humility in watching, an acknowledgement that goodness could exist without the spotlight, and that was a rare gift to witness in the heart of a bustling city. Eventually, the barista returned fully to her routine, wiping down counters, steaming milk, and handing drinks to customers with a smile. Her mind wandered back to the elderly woman outside, wondering where she would go next, whether anyone else would show the same compassion, and if the brief warmth she had provided would linger in the woman's day. It was a quiet hope, the kind that fuels small acts of generosity, the belief that even minor gestures matter in the grand tapestry of life. The man watching began to move, blending back into the rhythm of the city, his thoughts lingering on the scene he had just witnessed. He recognized that kindness, when genuine, had a way of resonating beyond the immediate moment, creating ripples that reached places unseen. He carried that thought silently, a personal reminder of humanity's potential for compassion. For the barista, the morning remained ordinary to everyone else but had been extraordinary to her. It was a reminder that empathy doesn't always require grand gestures, just attention, courage, and a willingness to act. She continued serving drinks, interacting with customers, and going about her work. But the memory of the elderly woman outside, grateful and seen, lingered in her heart. It was the kind of moment that stayed with a person, quietly shaping their understanding of what it meant to care for another human being. Though the day was still young, the ripple effect of that simple act had already begun, even if she didn't realize it. Outside, the city moved on as it always did, but in that small corner near the Starbucks, the world had been slightly altered. One person's compassion had touched another's life, and somewhere nearby, an observer carried the reminder that goodness existed in quiet, unassuming forms, often unnoticed but never without meaning. The day continued with its usual rhythm inside the cafe, but the barista's mind was restless. She had returned to her duties, serving drinks, taking orders, and cleaning tables, but each movement felt heavy with thought. The memory of the elderly woman outside lingered, a mixture of warmth and unease. She knew what she had done was kind, yet a small voice inside her whispered caution. Starbucks had strict rules about leftover food and interactions with non-customers. She had crossed a line, even if it was only in her mind, and the thought of potential consequences made her stomach twist with anxiety. She tried to focus on her work, taking orders with a smile and greeting each customer warmly, but her mind kept wandering back to the woman outside. What would happen to her next? Did she have a safe place to stay? Would anyone else care enough to help her as she had? These questions gnawed at her, and she found herself quietly wishing the world was a little kinder, a little slower, a little more attentive to those often overlooked. By mid-morning, the cafe manager approached her quietly, a serious expression on his face. She felt a sudden tightening in her chest, a warning that her small act might not go unnoticed for long. He asked to speak with her in the back, and she followed, her hand slightly trembling as she adjusted her apron. Once behind the counter, he looked at her with a mix of concern and professionalism. "I heard about what happened outside," he said quietly. "I understand why you did it, but you know our policy about leftover food. We're not allowed to give it to anyone, even if they really need it. I'm not saying you were wrong to help, but you have to understand the rules." The barista nodded, her throat tight. She had expected some kind of reprimand, but the seriousness in his voice hinted at something deeper. She could tell that the situation was already moving beyond a simple conversation. Later that day, an email arrived from corporate headquarters. The barista hesitated before opening it, a knot forming in her stomach. Her manager watched silently as she clicked the message, the words on the screen feeling heavier than the winter air outside. Starbucks had decided to terminate her employment. The reasoning was official and impersonal: violation of company policy regarding food safety and interactions with non-customers. The barista stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process what she was reading. She felt a deep ache, not just for herself, but for the woman outside, the one she had tried to help. It was as if her small act of kindness had been punished. News of the termination spread quickly, first among her coworkers and then through social media. Posts and messages started circulating, detailing the incident in brief snippets. Some people were outraged, expressing anger at the corporate decision. Others were sympathetic to the company, arguing that rules were rules and that the barista should have followed protocol. The story began to take on a life of its own, with debates emerging about the balance between empathy and policy. The barista sat at home that evening, scrolling through the posts and comments. She felt a mixture of emotions: sadness, frustration, and an odd sense of disbelief. It seemed surreal that something so human, so simple, could be viewed in such contrasting ways. People argued about her actions as if they were part of a larger battle. Yet for her, it had only been a matter of decency, a small gesture to ease someone else's suffering. The world seemed complicated, and her heart felt heavy under the weight of judgment and misunderstanding. Meanwhile, the elderly woman continued her day on the streets. She held onto the small bag of food and coffee, savoring the warmth and the taste, but more importantly, she carried with her a renewed sense of hope. The brief encounter had reminded her that not everyone was indifferent, that some people still saw the human behind the circumstance. It was a small light in a city that often felt cold and unyielding. She wandered slowly, trying to find a sheltered spot, reflecting on the kindness she had been shown. Her mind kept returning to the barista, whose gentle voice and careful actions had made a real difference, even if it was fleeting. The story continued to gain traction online. Videos from security cameras, social media posts, and witness accounts began to circulate, painting a fuller picture of the incident. People were moved, inspired, and sometimes frustrated. The public discourse centered on questions about empathy, corporate responsibility, and the human cost of rigid policies. Some saw the barista as a hero, standing up for what was right in a small, meaningful way. Others viewed it as a lesson in the importance of following rules, however inconvenient those rules might sometimes feel. Amid the growing attention, the barista received messages from strangers expressing support. They shared their own experiences, stories of moments when they had witnessed kindness or had acted on impulse to help someone in need. Each message was a reminder that human empathy existed in small but powerful ways, that people were capable of noticing, valuing, and honoring acts of generosity. The barista felt a mixture of relief and inspiration. It was comforting to know that not everyone judged her harshly, and that many saw the act for what it truly was: a simple human gesture. Back in the city streets, the elderly woman continued her day, carrying the small bag of food with care. She occasionally glanced around, half expecting someone to come by and repeat the kindness, but for the most part, she moved quietly through the world, holding on to a rare sense of dignity. The act of receiving food from someone who genuinely cared gave her strength, if only for a brief period. It reminded her that even in the harshest circumstances, moments of humanity could shine through. The barista spent the next few days reflecting on the incident and its aftermath. She thought about the choices people make, the small ways in which kindness can ripple through the lives of others. She also thought about the policies and rules that govern workplaces, the tension between empathy and structure, and the sometimes painful consequences of acting on one's moral instincts. She realized that life often required balancing these forces, making decisions that were not always clear-cut, and accepting that outcomes could be both rewarding and difficult. Through it all, she never regretted what she had done. The warmth in her heart, the sense of having made a real difference even for a short while, outweighed the disappointment and fear that had accompanied her dismissal. She knew that she had acted out of genuine concern for another human being, and that knowledge gave her strength. The memory of the elderly woman's grateful eyes stayed with her, a reminder of the simple power of empathy. As the story continued to unfold online and among the local community, discussions emerged about the broader implications. People debated how corporations could maintain policies without discouraging employees from acting humanely. They discussed ways to create more compassionate workplaces, where acts of kindness could coexist with operational rules. The barista became a symbol in these conversations, representing the tension between heart and regulation, and prompting reflection on what it meant to be truly human in the modern world. Despite the turmoil, the barista tried to return to a sense of normalcy in her life. She spent time with friends and family, engaging in conversations that reminded her of the everyday beauty of human connection. She also thought about ways to continue helping others, outside the constraints of her former job. Volunteering at local shelters, assisting community programs, or simply being attentive to those in need became part of her ongoing reflection. She realized that kindness was not limited to a single act or a single moment. It was a way of living, an orientation toward others that could manifest in countless forms. The elderly woman, meanwhile, reflected on the encounter as she navigated the streets. Though she had little, she carried with her a renewed sense of hope and trust. It was fragile, but it was enough to remind her that people could still act with care and empathy, even when the world seemed indifferent. The food she received nourished not only her body but also her spirit, and the memory of the barista's gentle presence became a small beacon in her day-to-day life. For the barista, the experience was transformative. It taught her lessons about courage, compassion, and the sometimes harsh realities of the world. She realized that even when actions had consequences, the intent behind them remained powerful. She had chosen humanity over procedure, connection over convenience, and that choice, though costly in some ways, affirmed who she was and what she valued. It was a lesson she would carry with her for years, guiding her decisions and shaping her interactions with others. As public discourse continued and the story circulated, the barista became aware that her actions had resonated far beyond her immediate environment. People from all walks of life shared their support, their outrage, and their reflections on the incident. For her, it was both overwhelming and comforting to witness how one small act could ignite conversation and inspire reflection on a broader scale. The world was messy, complicated, and sometimes unforgiving. But moments of kindness, no matter how small, could still make a lasting impact. In the midst of all this, she returned to her core understanding that empathy and humanity were not measured by recognition or reward, but by the willingness to act when someone else needed care. She carried this principle quietly, like a steady flame, knowing that it would guide her through the uncertainty and challenges that lay ahead. Her dismissal, the social media attention, and the debates over corporate policy were all external forces, but they could not diminish the truth she had lived in that moment outside the cafe. That kindness mattered, and it could change lives even if only for a fleeting moment. The barista's story and the elderly woman's continued to unfold in ways neither could fully predict. The ripple effects of that morning extended far beyond the immediate, touching hearts and minds, provoking thought and inspiring action. Yet at its core it remained simple and human, one person noticing another, taking the small step to help, and in doing so, leaving a mark that could not be erased. It was a reminder that in a world full of rules, rush, and indifference, humanity could still shine through quietly, persistently, and beautifully. The story that had begun with a quiet act of kindness was beginning to take a turn the barista could never have imagined. The morning she fed the elderly woman seemed like a fleeting moment, small and private, but a witness had observed it from across the street, unnoticed and unobtrusive. This witness, a well-known figure in the world of film and celebrity, had quietly appreciated the purity of the gesture, the human warmth that radiated from the young woman's actions. Days after the incident, the man had shared his thoughts with a small circle of trusted colleagues. He didn't want recognition for himself. The act he had witnessed spoke for itself, but he emphasized the importance of acknowledging people who, without expectation or reward, chose to act with kindness. The conversation grew, and his perspective began to reach other people in his circle. Slowly, awareness of the story started spreading beyond the immediate neighborhood and the online chatter that had already formed. Meanwhile, the barista continued her days reflecting on the incident and coping with her dismissal. She had not expected her life to become a topic of discussion, but the viral nature of social media had propelled her story into a much larger conversation. People shared her story, commented, debated, and in some cases offered support and sympathy. There was a growing sentiment online that she had done the right thing, and many expressed outrage at the corporate decision to terminate her. However, she remained cautiously skeptical. She was aware that public attention could be fleeting, and that change was often slow and inconsistent. One afternoon, the barista received a message from a local journalist who had heard about the incident and wanted to hear her side of the story. They asked for details about the morning, what she had been thinking, and how she had felt when handing the food to the elderly woman. She hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted the attention, but she eventually agreed. She wanted to be honest, to explain her intentions and to highlight the humanity behind her action, rather than the controversy surrounding corporate rules. Her words were careful but sincere. She spoke of noticing someone in need, of the simple decision to help, and of the realization that sometimes small actions could have profound meaning. She explained that her motivation had not been recognition, but empathy, a response to a human being who had been overlooked and forgotten. She wanted people to understand that acts of kindness do not always fit neatly into policies, but they are valuable nonetheless. As her story was shared in interviews and articles, more details began to emerge. Witnesses came forward, confirming the interaction between the barista and the elderly woman. Video clips previously unnoticed circulated online, showing the brief moment of connection outside the cafe. The barista's quiet bravery and the woman's grateful response captured the attention of many, highlighting the emotional weight of simple, compassionate actions. The presence of the celebrity witness added an unexpected dimension. People began to recognize that someone with influence had observed the scene and had spoken positively about it within their own networks. While the celebrity did not seek attention or publicity, their acknowledgement lent a certain weight to the story. It was a reminder that even in a world often distracted by fame and spectacle, genuine human connection could stand out and inspire others. Social media campaigns emerged, advocating for the barista and encouraging discussions about corporate policy, human decency, and the balance between rules and compassion. Hashtags spread, drawing attention to the incident and generating a broader conversation about empathy in everyday life. People shared similar stories from their own experiences, reflecting on times when they had acted on instinct to help someone, or when they had witnessed kindness that touched them deeply. The barista watched these developments with a mix of surprise and cautious hope. She did not seek fame or recognition, yet she realized that her actions had sparked an important conversation. She began to understand the ripple effect of kindness, how a single gesture could reach beyond the immediate moment and influence countless others. It was a humbling realization, one that reinforced her belief in the importance of empathy and compassion. The elderly woman, too, felt the effects in her own way. Though she had no idea of the attention the incident had garnered, she carried the memory of the morning with her. The food had nourished her body, but the acknowledgement and kindness had nourished her spirit. Each time she thought of the barista, she felt a small spark of hope, a reminder that people could act with generosity without expecting anything in return. In conversations with friends and acquaintances, the barista reflected on what had transpired. She spoke about the tension between policy and humanity, about the importance of noticing people who are often ignored, and about the courage it takes to act when the outcome is uncertain. She emphasized that acts of kindness are rarely performed for reward or recognition. They are performed because, in the moment, Helping another person feels like the right thing to do. The story began to influence more than just online conversations. Some local community organizations reached out, expressing interest in partnering with her to help provide food and assistance to people experiencing homelessness. Volunteers were inspired by her example, motivated to contribute their own time and resources to support those in need. The incident, initially small and private, began to take on a life of its own, demonstrating how compassion can inspire practical action and community engagement. As the days passed, media coverage expanded. Local news outlets ran human interest stories, highlighting the barista's courage and empathy. They interviewed those who had witnessed the incident, capturing the emotions and reactions of ordinary people moved by the simple act of sharing food with someone in need. Each story reinforced the idea that humanity could shine through in moments of unexpected connection, creating a sense of shared responsibility and care among the wider audience. The barista received letters and messages from people she had never met, thanking her for demonstrating courage and compassion. Some shared personal stories of struggle, explaining how seeing acts of kindness reminded them of their own capacity to help. Others offered support and encouragement, assuring her that doing the right thing mattered even when it came at a personal cost. Each message served as a reminder that her decision, though small and seemingly insignificant at the time, had resonated far beyond what she could have imagined. Through all of this, the barista remained grounded. She continued to reflect on her motivations, the impact of her actions, and the lessons she had learned. She understood that recognition was not the goal. Rather, the true value of kindness lay in its authenticity, in the sincere intention to alleviate someone else's suffering, even in small ways. She had acted from the heart, and the consequences, though difficult, could not diminish the significance of her decision. The celebrity witness, meanwhile, remained largely unseen in the public discourse, choosing not to seek attention. Yet their acknowledgement of the barista's action had contributed subtly to the momentum, amplifying the story in ways that inspired others. It was a quiet influence, showing that observing goodness even without intervention could lend credibility and weight to acts of humanity. The ripple effect continued. Volunteers, social organizations, and ordinary citizens began initiatives to provide food, warmth, and support to people in need. Awareness campaigns emerged, emphasizing the importance of noticing and helping those often ignored. The barista's simple act became a symbol of the potential for ordinary people to make meaningful change in their communities. For the barista, the experience had been transformative. It taught her about courage, empathy, and the profound impact that small, deliberate acts of kindness could have. She realized that in a world often focused on rules, procedures, and efficiency, moments of humanity were essential. They reminded people of what it meant to care for one another, to act selflessly, and to prioritize compassion over convenience. In quiet moments, she reflected on the elderly woman, hoping that she remained safe and that the small gesture had left a lasting impression. She also thought about the broader implications of her actions, the conversations they had sparked, and the awareness they had raised. It was a powerful lesson in the potential of individual choices to affect wider change, and in the enduring value of empathy. Even in the face of obstacles and criticism, the barista continued to engage with her community, inspired to act where she could to help those in need, and to encourage others to do the same. She understood that her story was not just about a single moment, but about a philosophy of life, noticing others, acting with compassion, and valuing human connection above rules or recognition. It was a lesson that resonated deeply, a reminder that even small acts could create ripples of hope and change. In the weeks following the incident, the barista felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. Though her life had been disrupted, and though she had faced challenges and criticism, she knew she had acted in alignment with her values. The story of that morning, once private and fleeting, had grown into something meaningful, influencing conversations, inspiring action, and reminding people of the power of human kindness. The ripple of compassion extended in ways that neither she nor the elderly woman could have predicted. People began to look more closely at their own communities, noticing those in need, offering help in small and large ways, and sharing stories that emphasized humanity over indifference. The barista's simple, heartfelt act had become a catalyst for awareness, empathy, and community engagement. As she continued her days, she carried a quiet hope that the story would continue to inspire others, that kindness would ripple outward, touching more lives than she could ever know. Her actions, once private, had become a symbol of what it meant to care, to notice, and to act, showing that even in a world governed by rules and routine, human connection and compassion could shine brightly, leaving lasting impact far beyond the moment it occurred. As days passed, the attention surrounding the barista's story grew. Social media posts, articles, and interviews had captured the public's imagination. People discussed the tension between corporate rules and human compassion, highlighting the barista's courage and the ripple effects of her small act of kindness. She watched the coverage with a mix of disbelief and quiet gratitude. While she never sought recognition, the support and understanding from strangers reminded her that empathy could resonate far beyond a single moment. The barista had returned to her daily routine, but her life had been subtly transformed. She spent time reflecting on what had occurred, on the choices she had made, and on the simple act that had connected her to someone often overlooked by the world. Each thought reinforced her belief in the importance of human connection and empathy, no matter how fleeting or small the act might seem. Meanwhile, the elderly woman continued to navigate the streets, carrying the warmth of the barista's kindness with her. She had a small sense of security that she rarely felt, a reminder that there were people willing to notice, care, and act. Though her circumstances had not changed dramatically, the encounter had left a lasting impact on her spirit. The simple act of sharing food and attention had reinforced her sense of worth, a fragile but vital spark in a world often indifferent to her struggles. The barista's story eventually reached the higher levels of Starbucks management. Reports of the public's reaction and the ongoing discussions about corporate responsibility prompted a review of the situation. The company recognized that while policies were in place to maintain consistency and safety, there were times when rigid adherence could conflict with basic human empathy. They saw that the barista had acted with genuine concern, and that the public largely viewed her actions as commendable. After careful consideration, Starbucks reached out to the barista with an offer to reinstate her. The message conveyed an apology for the way the situation had been handled, and a commitment to review policies to allow more room for compassionate actions in the future. The barista read the message with a mix of relief and cautious optimism. She had not expected reinstatement, and the gesture felt like an acknowledgement not only of her actions, but also of the broader lesson about humanity in everyday work. She returned to the cafe, greeted warmly by her manager and coworkers who had supported her throughout the ordeal. There was a sense of relief and quiet celebration, though the barista remained reflective. She understood that the true significance of her action was not the reinstatement, not the public attention, but the connection she had made and the awareness it had raised. Her return to work felt like a restoration of balance, a moment to continue serving her community both through her job and through acts of compassion. In the following weeks, Starbucks implemented small policy adjustments, allowing employees to find ways to help those in need while maintaining health and safety standards. The incident became a teaching moment within the company, reminding staff and management alike that human empathy could coexist with organizational rules. It was a rare acknowledgement that kindness was valuable, even in a corporate setting, and that small actions could inspire meaningful reflection and change. For the barista, the experience solidified her understanding of the delicate balance between doing what is right and navigating institutional structures. She continued to interact with customers with the same warmth and care, her perspective deepened by the lessons she had learned. Each interaction, each moment of connection, became an opportunity to bring a little light into someone's day, no matter how routine her work seemed. The elderly woman, still navigating the streets, continued to remember the kindness she had received. Though her life remained challenging, the encounter reminded her that people could act with generosity, without expectation of reward. The simple warmth she experienced that morning stayed with her, helping her endure difficult days with a renewed sense of hope. It was a quiet, enduring reminder that human connection could exist even in the harshest environments. The barista also began engaging with local community initiatives. She volunteered at shelters, participated in food drives, and shared her story to encourage others to notice those in need. Her experience had inspired a broader understanding of how small actions could create a ripple effect, influencing not only individuals, but also communities. She realized that kindness was not a single moment, but a continuous practice, something that could be nurtured and extended in countless ways. Media coverage eventually shifted from controversy to celebration. Stories highlighted the lessons learned, the changes inspired within the company, and the community initiatives that had grown from the original act of compassion. People discussed the importance of noticing those often ignored, the courage required to act despite uncertainty, and the enduring impact of small, selfless gestures. The barista's story became an example of how individual actions could spark dialogue, reflection, and positive change. Through it all, the barista remained grounded. She did not seek fame or reward, but understood the significance of her actions and their effect on the lives of others. The experience reinforced her commitment to empathy, reminding her that even in a structured world, moments of humanity could make a profound difference. She carried this lesson quietly but firmly, using it to guide her choices, interactions, and approach to life. The ripple of kindness continued to extend beyond the immediate participants. People who read the story were inspired to act in their own communities, reaching out to help neighbors, friends, or strangers. Some organized volunteer efforts, while others simply made a conscious choice to notice those around them more carefully. The barista's small act had ignited a chain of reflection and action, demonstrating the enduring power of compassion and attention. For the elderly woman, the encounter remained a cherished memory. It was more than just the food. It was the acknowledgement of her humanity, the reminder that she mattered, even if only for a brief moment. That memory carried her through days of difficulty, offering reassurance that kindness could be found even in unexpected places. It shaped her interactions, her perception of others, and her hope for the future. The barista, now reinstated, returned to her routine with renewed purpose. Each customer interaction became a chance to exercise patience, warmth, and care. She recognized that the impact of her actions could extend far beyond what she could immediately see. The story of her act, the witness who had observed it, and the public response had all contributed to a larger understanding of empathy, encouraging people to act with kindness whenever possible. Reflecting on the journey, the barista understood that life often presented moments of choice, to act with courage and compassion, or to follow rules blindly. She realized that acting from the heart, even when faced with uncertainty or potential consequences, could inspire change, foster connection, and illuminate the value of human empathy. Her small gesture had reminded both herself and others of what it meant to truly see and care for another person. The ripple effects of the story continued to inspire action, discussion, and reflection. Volunteers helped feed those in need. Community members checked on neighbors, and organizations shared resources more freely. Each small act built on the last, demonstrating that kindness, though often subtle, could accumulate into meaningful impact. The barista's choice had set off a wave that extended far beyond her initial intention, proving that one person's empathy could influence countless others. In quiet moments, the barista often thought about the elderly woman and the brief connection they had shared. She carried the memory not as a burden but as a reminder of why human kindness mattered. Each day offered opportunities to act, to notice, and to care, and she embraced them with a quiet confidence. She understood that these moments, small as they might seem, had the potential to shape lives in ways that were profound, lasting, and transformative. Ultimately, the story became a testament to the enduring power of empathy and human connection. It showed that acts of kindness could resonate far beyond their immediate context, inspiring awareness, reflection, and action. The barista, the elderly woman, and the observer each played a part in a narrative that highlighted the capacity for compassion, demonstrating that even in a world dominated by rules and routine, humanity could shine brightly, leaving a lasting mark on the hearts of those who witnessed it. The barista's experience reinforced a fundamental truth, that noticing others, acting with care, and offering kindness without expectation could change lives, including one's own. It was a lesson she carried forward, a quiet beacon guiding her choices, interactions, and understanding of the world. Through this journey, she learned that compassion, however small or simple, had the power to ripple outward, touching lives in ways that extended far beyond the moment, leaving the world a little warmer, a little more connected, and a little more human.